Canada. For those of you who don't know who we are, COCAN is a community of over 550 Canadians, CIOs, CISOs, and IT executives. Our mission is to facilitate networking, sharing of best practices, executive development, and to collaborate on issues facing CIOs, CISOs, and IT leaders. Today's fireside chat is based on the white paper, Navigating the AI PC Era, Cybersecurity Challenges and Innovations. It is a direct result of the active collaboration between our COCAN members and our sponsors from Dell and Intel. We want to thank you all for your generous support of our community and the investment that you have made in COCAN. After our initial discussion, we will have a brief Q&A for anyone wishing to learn more or to share related insights. Immediately following the webinar, we will send a link to download the white paper. So let's get started. Our moderator, George Alcura, is the Chief Information Security Officer at Ruby Life Limited. George is one of Canada's leading information security professionals and a security leader with a highly diverse experiential background. George entered the cyber field in 2016 after having graduated from the Royal Military College of Canada and completing a successful career in serving with the Canadian Armed Forces. George worked his way up from security operations analyst at CGI to the director of managed cyber services for ADGA Group Inc. before becoming a CISO there in 2021. He continues to serve as a CISO today for Ruby Life Limited, a global software development company. As well, he is a director for the Ottawa chapter of COCAN. And now I'm going to turn this over to our esteemed moderator to introduce today's guest speakers in our panel. George, take it away.
Thanks, Lorraine, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate you guys joining us on a Friday afternoon, on a very beautiful Friday afternoon. I hope it's great where you guys all are. As Lorraine has mentioned, we had the opportunity to work with our wonderful panelists today to actually come up with the white paper, which will be released after this presentation. And we're covering some pretty important topics right now in terms of navigating the AI PC era. And we all know, and we've all been through a lot of meetings where this has been the topic du jour for like the last year or so. So I'm really excited to see what we're going to be going through today with our two panelists. So first, I'd like to introduce our panelist here, Darren Patel. Darren is a Chief Client Technologist at Dell. I'm sure many of you all are aware of Dell and have seen them and enjoyed their wonderful products at some point through your usual work days. Darren, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for that, George, and team, everyone that's taking the time out of their afternoon. We certainly appreciate it here. As George alluded to, my name is Darren Patel. I'm one of the client technologists here at Dell. Basically, an expert on the entire portfolio as it relates to the commercial client offerings. So things like the laptops and whatnot is really my area of expertise. Excited to be here. I'll pass it over to Eric from Intel.
Great, thanks, Darren. Eric Chalk from Intel, a technical solution specialist. So I cover all things commercial client from an Intel technology perspective. And I'm based in Toronto, Canada, but I do cover all of Canada and Northeast US.
Awesome. Thanks for introducing yourselves, gentlemen. So I think what we should be doing now is really just getting into the discussion. Let's get into the meat of this thing. And the first thing we want to look at are really just a series of, we'll say, members submitted questions that are going to cover really things going from implementation, the use case, and then operational technologies as well. So I'm going to start off. I just want to ask, Darren, we'll start with you. How has the transformative impact of AI PCs really changed or impacted cybersecurity strategies for some of your customer organizations?
Yeah, great question, George. And, I think we should hit reset here and probably define what an AI PC is before we further this conversation, because, for the 42 of us that are all here, people may have varying degrees of what an AI PC is. So at its core, this year, especially with what our friends at Intel have done from an architecture standpoint, you're seeing some big changes across the computing industry, where now your traditional PC having a CPU, central processing unit, or a GPU, you're now seeing the emergence of what we call this NPU. And that's a neural processing unit. It's a low power, dedicated AI engine. So depending on the applications that you're using, you can potentially offload that to the NPU. Not only that, you will see from a keyboard perspective, and because my background's on, you will see a Copilot key directly on your keyboard, and I'll drop that in the chat a little later so everyone can see that. So NPU, from a technology standpoint, on the keyboard, you'll see that Copilot key, and then basically, the experience will come to life. So if we go back to your question, which was really around how the transformative impacts of AI PCs have impacted those cybersecurity strategies, there's a couple of things, right? The first thing that, a lot of the customers that I talk to across the country, the biggest risk to any organization is going to sit between the keyboard and chair. And if I pause for a second and let you think about who that is, it's the end users. It's the end users that potentially could click on that link, potentially introduce malware. In the era of AI PCs, you're seeing this AI for good and AI for bad. So the first, AI for good, think about the advancements, what we're seeing with regards to operational efficiencies, how you're able to automate, streamline tasks. But at the same time, you're seeing this threat landscape change at astronomical paces. So AI can be used from a malware perspective. You can see threat actors, if they're writing a phishing email, gone are the days where we're going to see spelling mistakes or poor grammar. I can now use my AI engine that's directly attached to my system and craft a very good email. But not only that, I could prompt and say, hey, write it as an expert in the particular industry, and now these emails are getting even crazier. So when you think about the overall landscape, we got to look at how security is built into the device. And that's really one of the strengths that we're seeing from both a Dell and Intel perspective, and we'll probably have multiple opportunity throughout the conversation to unpack some of that. But I'll throw it back to you, George, if you have any questions, follow up.
I mean, I do want to give Eric a chance to kind of address the question as well, but you kind of brought up a really important point, and I would wonder, in your opinion, then, given that threat actors are now using AI enhanced methodologies, does that mean then that you would advise that all of our products now have to suddenly become AI enhanced, or is there still any space left for the traditional IT?
So I'd probably look at it from two angles. The first is the AI PC landscape that we're in. You're going to see a ton of streamlining of tasks, automation, things like that. And there's significant benefits to the end users to introduce technologies like this. But at the same time, the second area is you need correct policies, governance around how you introduce these technologies. And if you look at some of the research that will be provided in the white paper after this session, you'll look at some of the trends with regards to what we're seeing from a Gartner perspective. AI PCs are going to be everywhere. And I think now's the time to dig in. If you haven't already started testing out these AI PCs, reach out to your IT providers. If it's Dell, we'd love to get together and showcase some of that. So now's the time to jump in, and your policies and framework are going to have to set the stage as to how these products are going to be used.
Awesome. Thanks, Darren. Eric, the Intel perspective, what are the impacts of AI PCs?
Yeah, there's many. I'll just look at it very simplistically from two, maybe three viewpoints. The first one is the EDR, endpoint detection, remediation, or response. And the actual agents themselves have gotten a lot better. Now they can use silicon-assisted pieces of it to make them run more effectively. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is using the AI capabilities inside what's now available, namely the GPU, NPU, et cetera, for things that are not traditionally covered by EDRs. So, for example, a lot of my customers, I'm sure folks on the phone have this as well, where their help desk agents serving the endpoint and customers don't use a hard phone anymore. They use a soft phone. And when you use a soft phone, we have now methods of detecting what's happening on that particular call. So based on the cadence of that call, the words being used, there are programs out there. I know some of the customers I'm working with, they actually do this now, where they can determine if potentially if fraudulent is happening on that particular call in real time, because now we're using soft phones and that processing is happening locally in that device, which can reduce the latency. So those are two aspects. The other things from an AI PC perspective is things kind of outside AI. And I'll kind of delve into this really quickly. At Intel, we have what they call customer advisory boards, or CAB for short. And we get feedback from customers in terms of which really dictates how we develop our products going forward. And one of the concerns that a lot of customers bring up in the large enterprise space is the amount of resources the security agents, namely the EDRs, traditional EDRs, take up on the devices. And how can we reduce that? And there's a few different ways, but from a silicon perspective, what Intel has done is we've changed the technology in terms of how the compute threads work. We have what they call performance cores and efficiency cores. Now with this AI PC, as Darren defined, the code name for that is Core Ultra in the marketplace from an Intel perspective. Now, the Core Ultra CPUs, they have this hybrid technology built into it, which has different tiers of processing power. We've added a third tier of processing power. So now a lot of these security agents can run at that lowest tier without affecting the performance of that PC. So there's different aspects of the AI PC, how it affects cybersecurity. I just gave you some quick examples of that.
Beautiful. I mean, so this is amazing to me because now we're talking about hardware redefined AI-enabled PC capabilities. And Darren, you're really touching point on some of the software-enabled parts. I think this really kind of goes into the next question of like, what is, and then we'll start with Eric, what is your opinion on an AI-enabled cybersecurity landscape? And what specific challenges are you seeing being posed by those new technologies now being used by bad actors?
Yeah, it's always a game of cat and mouse. For example, we work with a lot of different vendors, security vendors, to enable the silicon to help them get on board when the product's announced. But it's always a cat and mouse. Again, as you mentioned, George, they're going to be the other guys using it for the wrong reasons, and it's a matter of how fast can we catch up with those guys for detection. Like, for example, the deep fake voices where we can pretend it's Darren speaking on the phone when it's not. So those things, we're finding ways of finding digital signatures, methods of using AI to actually counteract or at least detect that in terms of what's actually happening. So it's a cat and mouse game. Things are evolving. Right now, a lot of the enablement is from an EDR perspective, but there's other things that are more customized coming on board. I can't disclose too much because they haven't been in market yet.
But would you say then, and Darren, I'd love to get your take on this too, because you kind of mentioned this a little bit in your last response. Is there then going to have to be a greater emphasis on cyber awareness training and simulation training, right? So if the real threat vector remains to be the person behind the screen, right? And that means on the client side, doesn't it mean then that we now have to go from taking TTXs from, PowerPoint exercises that quite frankly, I think a lot of folks don't really like doing when they're that dry, to now we have these massive, potentially multi-day simulations that are immersive, that utilize deepfake technology against your own corporate CEOs or officers to actually try to fake the members of the team. They actually use a lot of these AI enhanced methodologies. They use a lot of the phishing that you see, a lot of the smishing as well. So I've seen, or I've talked to some folks at the big fours who actually, for some of the services like this they offer, they will fake phone calls, they'll fake video messages, they'll fake everything through an exercise. Do we now have to invest heavily in this human oriented training to actually be able to safely work within the AI optimized space? And Darren, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, so I think you raise a pretty good point around from a training perspective, but also from a policy governance, how you're standardizing across the organization. So I think there has to be a lot of synergies amongst the leaders of your organization. First, to embrace AI, I think head on. It's truly an innovation catalyst. So now's the time to jump in, not necessarily take a step back and not look into these AI technologies. You don't have the time or capacity to step sideways or just brush it under the rug. It's now's the time to jump in. At the same time, right, to the points that I think both Eric and myself have brought up a little bit earlier, you got to make sure that you have a strong policy around that. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces. And George, I think even from your experience as in the role that you're in, you're probably spending your cycles and your time to look at policy governance, standards across the organization. Taking it a step further, if I look at these large language models that exist in the public cloud, you're seeing now a lot of small language models where now you have opportunity to put confidential material into a smaller LLM or a SLM, an SLM, and now you have to worry about, hey, how's that data being used? Is it going to train that model? Is my confidential secrets going to be, sent out into the club to provide a response to someone else's questions? Organizations are going to need a policy and strategy around the end-to-end framework of AI, because it's going to touch virtually every single industry out there, and it already has started to.
But I mean, really, you have to look at it like, what can we do then to try to stay ahead? Because as Eric's pointed out, it's a constant cat and mouse game. And at the end of the day, some people have really critical enterprise. We all, I mean, if you're employed by a place, it's critical to protect their enterprise. It's going to be important to you. But given the membership composition of the CIO Association, and the fact that some of these people lead critical infrastructure that could cripple the national economy if something was to happen to it, how then do we stay ahead of it? How do we maintain the advantage over the adversary? Eric, I'll start with you.
I mean, as Darren mentioned, a lot of it is training, and I'll just speak on personal experience. Company I work with, I'm not wearing my Intel shirt today. Shame on me. I'm wearing my Blue Jay shirt, so I should have known.
Go Jays.
Yeah, there we go. Beat Texas 4-0.
Yeah.
And my wife's workplace, which I won't say where it is, but we do have training where they do actually condition people. I wouldn't say shame them, but condition people where they will send you phishing emails, and all of us have to take training, sign off on it. And if you do click on one of these phishing emails, and it looks pretty legit, I mean, it's done very well. You click on it, the next thing it pops up saying, "Hey, this is a phishing email. Please take this training." So I don't see that that often in various corporations, but I think the better ones do that, because a lot of it is training. It's like, I can show you a PowerPoint on how to hit a baseball, but until you actually swing that bat and have something happen, like in a practice, for example, you're not going to know what to do. And I think that training is quite critical, that actual hands-on simulation by sending you, fake emails and websites, things like that.
So I'm going to switch gears for a second, because we kind of hit on the training point. I think everyone can agree on that. Darren, can you please tell me, what are your thoughts on organizations leveraging AI, and we'll go to Eric on this for hardware innovations, to accelerate their threat detection and initiating a rapid response capability?
Yeah, so from my perspective, when you look at the organizations that are leveraging AI and at the hardware level, from a threat landscape perspective, AI is going to help with threat detection, right? And you're seeing a lot of the vendors out there from a security perspective. If I think about the CrowdStrikes of the world, where they're integrating AI into their practices. So now you're going to start to see hardware. So the Intels from a CPU perspective, plus Dell from the overall end user computing experience, plus this software ecosystem all come together, right? And that's really where you need to have a robust framework covering the device intrinsically. And I can touch on, what Dell's doing from a security perspective, how we build our devices, how we have security intrinsic to the device, but it's also that ecosystem around it. So whether it's your, security partners that you work with to secure your environments, in the hybrid era, right? Endpoints could be scattered pretty much anywhere across the globe. So you have even more challenges that you're going to start to see. But I think you need to be proactive here and embrace kind of those technologies to help you with threat detection.
Sweet. So then we'll shift to Eric then, because I think Darren springs on a really good point, and I'm wondering, from a hardware point of view, how does that match up?
Yeah, so Intel brings various technologies, silicon assisted. Some of it does require OS enablement. In other words, it's built into silicon, but it can't detect it, but it can't really do anything until the actual endpoint detection remediation software takes place. Other ones happens just under the OS, and everything happens for you automatically. And we've been doing this for a long time. So an example of that would be in 2015, Intel created something called threat detection technology. That's put my marketing hat on for a second. And what it does basically is it offloads the memory scanning from the CPU, which traditionally would have, let's say, 2 to 4 cores, to the GPU, which have, let's say, 96, what they call execution. So things can happen much quicker. And over time, that threat detection technology has evolved. And about 3 years ago, Intel put something in place from a hardware perspective for anomalous behavior, things such as ransomware and crypto mining, where it can detect that. But again, we can detect it at silicon level, but we still need our partners to take the actual action of stopping that attack from happening. So those are examples of things that require OS enablement. Other things that Intel has from a silicon level that do not require it are things that are found on vPro platform devices. So vPro is kind of the de facto standard of what enterprises buy. And a lot of the attacks now aren't happening at an OS level, but they're happening at a firmware level. So an example of something that Intel does is something called runtime bias resilience. So when the machine boots up, it loads the firmware into a block of memory, and then it executes from there. So what Intel has done is we've actually hardened that memory address, and we've also checked that that firmware is actually the firmware using certificate-based verification. So we do these things below the OS as well. So those are just some examples. We have many, many more from a security perspective, but these are just some things from the client side.
So this is kind of an important thing to kind of keep in mind too, because I've noticed that there seems to be a trend of organizations in the last year and a half moving back to the prem, moving back to the DC. And I remember it was maybe what 3-4 years ago, a lot of folks were bashful enough to say that on-prem is dead, everything's going to the cloud. Eric, what are your thoughts then on protecting the I guess we'll say revived data center technology?
Yeah, I've been in the industry for a long time, so it's like goes in waves. It goes back in the DC, back locally, back in the DC, thin clients, back in the mainframes. But I think a lot of the AI perspective, I think we're seeing a lot of it go back locally as well, where that data is processed. So I work with a lot of financial institutions, in the Northeast, and it's probably not difficult to figure out who they are because they're mostly in New York. But a lot of them are actually looking at doing that processing, especially that generative AI piece of it, local in that PC. That way the data stays local on that machine without actually going somewhere else. And that's quite key. So you will see a combination of both things, but a lot of it we see moving back local in that machine because now it can be processed locally on that device. And even offline if necessary. So you don't even have to be connected where the data is leaving your PC somewhere else. So I think we're seeing that comeback again of having data processed locally, and also not just from a privacy perspective, but from a latency perspective, it helps greatly as well.
Darren, what's your take then? Because obviously Dell sells a very, very, we'll say, diverse product set. What's your take then on protecting both hardware and software solutions as a result of AI risk?
Yeah, so great question, and I'm gonna piggyback a tiny bit off what Eric was talking about, how security elements are baked into the processor stack. So from a Dell Technologies perspective, it's all about our trusted device story. And it starts with the device. And I've alluded to this a few times already, but you need to have an intrinsically secure device. So security needs to be built into that. So from a Dell Technologies standpoint, if I think about, the hardware, the endpoints that I'm talking about, you're going to see things like Safe BIOS, which is a dedicated way to find out whether or not that BIOS is the same version that shipped from Dell factory, right? We have Safe ID, dedicated spot away from the processor where end user credentials are stored. So if I'm a hacker trying to attack the OS layer, I physically am not able to see that. So built into the device, you're going to see a ton of advancements around creating that intrinsically secure device. Now, built with, so even before we get to the endpoints hitting your premise, right? It's all about the supply chain, how we're building our products, the type of vendors that we're working with, the type of supply chain security. We could send, a very extensive white paper around what Dell is doing from a security perspective as it relates to supply chain assurance. But if you look at what's happened over the years, right? Supply chain tampering and things like that, there's very large checks and balances around that to ensure our supply chain stays as secure as possible. And now you're seeing more elements around secured component verification. So down to the components that are going into it. So as we build our devices, we are building with security in mind. So I've covered two of the three. One, how security is built in, how we're building with security. And that third piece is the ecosystem and the software, how security is built on. So whether it's the CrowdStrikes of the world, the Carbon Blacks, there are a ton of vendors out there that Dell Technologies works with that can help you secure your endpoints. And for a lot of the folks that are on the call, we're up to about 47 right now. You guys may have existing security vendors that you work with. So it's all about that integration. The hardware needs to talk to the software, and you need to ensure that you have visibility on everything going in between that.
That's a really good answer. And I appreciate kind of the fact that you hit all three bases on that. And it also kind of is a perfect segue into my next question. And I'm going to have to pose it to you since you called it out. From a costing perspective, how should IT leaders approach CS enablement management in this AI era?
So good question. And in the era that we're all in, where everyone's looking at costs and cutting costs, we were just on a call just yesterday, and this came up where you look at industries, right? Things like security and governance and technology, those industries are still spending a ton of money. So obviously, if data is the lifeblood of your organization, you're going to do whatever it takes to keep that secure. So going back to kind of that question that you've asked, how would I put a price around that? And it really, I would point it back to the customer in this scenario that I'm talking to, the organizations that are all on this, is what is your risk tolerance, right? What would you equate to dollars and cents if your information leaked, or if you saw something happen where you hit the headline? Now everyone's got processes and practices in place to hopefully prevent that from happening, but in the AI landscape, the threat vectors that are constantly changing, I don't know that you can put a price on that, right? You got to do some analysis internally to see, what are those qualitative risks? What are those quantitative risks? And my project management brain's probably taken over here. But you got to do some risk assessment internally and then figure out, what kind of pricing you can put in. From a hardware perspective, bringing it back to Dell, everything that I just talked to you from a Dell trusted device perspective, security built in, thanks to the deep partnerships with people like Intel. There is no cost to that. That's all free of charge as you purchase the device, right? Your built on story is, your security agents and the vendors and partnerships that you're working with. So, I could probably ask you, George, flip the table from the moderator role, but maybe you've seen stuff and probably have a better answer there on how would you quantify that from a cost perspective, and maybe you want to share.
I mean, first, I want to get Eric's perspective too, so I'm going to hold on that, but I'll address it. I work in a mid-sized organization that's private equity owned. So the conversation I have to have around any procurement strategy, I think it becomes a little bit more difficult because, and if you ever, I'm sure you deal with a lot of similar medium-sized commercial clients. If you have a good revenue month, all the ideas are great. If you have a down revenue month, guess we're doing it next year. So, I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of a lot of what I deal with. And the other issue that I have to deal with as well, and I don't know, I have to talk to some of my public sector colleagues in the CIO can. Right now, I'm seeing a lot of, hey, we would like to try out this new tool, or maybe this might help us out. Okay, well, what can you replace then in the current stack? So it's all about resource optimization and trying to see where you can actually get the most tool utilization. So they want to try to reduce the actual tech stack that a lot of security organizations are dealing with. And I think I don't really know how it's going to work out because the challenge to secure things is becoming far more diverse and I would say more difficult than it's ever been. But the resourcing is the tightest it's ever been, probably in the last like 10 years at least. So I don't really know how that's going to scale out at a whole of industry level. I don't think this is quite sustainable. But really, again, it's unfortunate, but when you get into the costing and the budgeting standpoint, there are so many factors because it's a whole of economy scale type issue. So it's tough, but yeah, from my perspective, I think about costing way more than someone who grew up in IT and doing cybersec would. Eric, what's your perspective then? Like you're dealing with a lot of, I say, similar clients but with different problems. How are their perspectives around costing when it comes to the solutions that you offer?
Yeah, I'll try to kill two birds with one stone. We have a program at Intel called IT at Intel or Intel at IT. And basically, we invite customers to speak to our IT folks in terms of, because we have an IT shop as well, and I'm sure we have very similar concerns and practices and best practices, et cetera. The one that we hear a lot is in terms of, and I'll tie this into cost in a second, is the physical resources, the CPU resources being tackled by 1,000 security agents being run. And Intel had this issue as well back in the day. And then we had to take a look of it saying, well, why do we have, let's say, these 15 different agents which do the same thing? Why can't we consolidate that? And it does do two things. Number one, it reduces the actual resources on that device, which is obviously the key benefit. And the other one is costing, is licensing. You're paying less for licensing. I think what's happening now, and maybe this is my myopic view of things, but I think the agents are better now at terms of doing more things. So in the past, you would have a very specific agent only for data loss prevention, an agent that only does this. But now the scope is a bit broader. So now that consolidation is a bit easier, and thus reducing the licensing costs of the various agents that are required now in an organization.
I think that's really interesting then, because it really kind of speaks to kind of my next question, which is what are your thoughts on the benefits then of taking a more consolidated approach? I mean, how important is supplier diversity in optimizing AI enablement for an enterprise? That one actually can go to Eric to start, and then we'll go to Darren. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess the benefit of consolidation is many, right? So the resources at the endpoint level, the costing of licensing. But I think the other piece as well that may be overlooked is the single pane of glass. You want to, each enterprise EDR will have its own pane of glass to manage it. And I think people want to simplify that. So if you can do that, that's a benefit as well from a day-to-day management perspective.
Thank you. And Darren?
Yeah, so from my perspective, in the conversations that we've been in over the years, and personally, from my perspective, what I've seen is, I think you have to do a exhaustive look at your existing infrastructure, find out where those kinks are, and then look to prioritize how you're going to spend time and resources to patch that particular armor, right? And in the era that you just talked about, George, a little bit about cost cutting era, where you may not be a large organization, how do you make do with what you have? You got to look at those areas where you may have holes in your armor or kinks, and then go try and prioritize what makes sense. If it's pulling in 3 vendors together under one umbrella because you can achieve economies of scale because they have that same level of expertise across one single organization, then you potentially go and look at it. But I think you have to do a lot of investigative measures internally, and then go see what you can prioritize in the landscape that you're working with.
Yeah, and I think I can add some perspective on that as well. It really depends on how much due diligence I think you conduct in your procurement, and really starting with a requirements first based approach. Like I know for my shop and what I have the folks do with my team, we have an issue that we want to solve for or something. We build up a requirements document that'll cover the technical requirements, the operational requirements, and then some notes on business case. So we'll also have like pricing and kind of what budgetary numbers are available and stuff. By having that requirement sheet, we're then able to do discovery on whatever that category is. Like let's say, it's endpoint agents. I'm very happy with my endpoint supplier. This is just like a made up example. But if we're looking at replacing endpoint agents, then we're going to see, okay, well, what's Gartner says in the field? What are forums saying are in the field? What you do for your basic executive research. And once you've gathered your list of 5 to 10, and it's a really long and tedious process, but you go through 5 to 10 discovery calls to narrow down a final group of 2 or 3 to run a comparative POC or POV against the requirements, like the common set of requirements that you've laid out. And while you're going through that process and you're scoring them, you're also going through business case evaluation discussions. So you're trying to negotiate price while the technical teams are doing their things in terms of the software testing. And then by the end, when a winner has been declared, Hopefully you'll have actually the contract arrangements rolled out. So then you'll be able to actually sign the deal as soon as the POC is done. And that's kind of the methodology I've used to kind of figure out what's going on, because since AI has happened, we've seen an absolute explosion in startups. A lot of point solutions, a lot of things that arguably could be features that are just waiting to be acquired. But this is the only way that I've found you can actually make any sense of what's happening in the vendor landscape right now. And I do tend to agree with you. Consolidation, whenever possible, especially with known shops, with shops that are reputable, like Dell, like Intel, you're never really going to get in trouble for buying a Dell or an Intel, you know? So let's go to the next question here. I want to know, and this is going to be, I want to take this to Eric. What should IT leaders consider when kind of exploring a new consolidated approach to their AI enabled security strategy?
That's a pretty loaded question. It's pretty big, pretty broad. Um, yeah, let me think about this one. What should they consider for consolidate? I think they have to think about all the different potential attack vectors now surface scan, because there's a lot more now available. Like, we talking that just traditional EDRs can handle. And I think a lot of forums like this one, discussing with your peers in the same verticals in terms of, what have they thought of, what have they've encountered, I think helps greatly as well. Because I think there'll always be new attack vectors coming up now, because people are pretty smart, even the bad guys. And it's a matter of forums like this that will tell you kind of what's coming out there, what have they seen, because we don't know what we don't know yet. And a lot of stuff is very new. We are working with a lot of different EDRs. We have our own white hat hacking department at Intel, but there's things that we just don't know about. That things, people are very creative in terms of finding new attack surfaces. But it's a very open-ended question. I wish I can give you a better answer at this point in time.
Well, maybe Darren can fill in the gaps. Darren, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I kind of agree with Eric in terms of, hey, it being a pretty loaded question. But if I had to look at it, from a high level perspective, if you're looking to consolidate, how easy is it going to integrate into your existing system? How easy can you scale up, scale down? And from a cybersecurity perspective, as AI continues to expand, how quickly is that application, that vendor, going to keep up with it? From a compliance perspective, you think about what's happening from a regulatory level, there is so many things to think about. And then you compound this whole AI piece, now that regulatory landscape gets even more complex. So now, these new software titles that are hitting the market, they have to think about even more. So if I were to boil it down, how easy is it going to integrate? What kind of scale can you get from it? And then from a regulatory perspective, that whole realm needs to come to light.
That's really good value on that. Thank you for doing that. And then I do agree with that kind of perspective on it as well. But it kind of makes me think, and for the next question, I'll start with Eric. How can IT leaders then foster better internal cross-functional collaboration with not only their board of directors, but across the entire organization to get the aligned vision on how they want to use these new technologies for cybersecurity?
Yeah, I'll just use a recent example. We all know what happened recently in July with a global outage. And there's one technology that Intel has been, I guess, it's been in market since 2005. It's called Intel vPro, or more specifically, active management technology. But it's dormant in your PCs, but you have to turn on for you to use it. We had a lot of customers that did activate this active management technology and did remediate very quickly from the outage that occurred. Now, historically, we always say, hey, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, but a lot of organizations were hesitant to put it in place because there were actually barriers, and I won't say cybersecurity, but a lot of times cybersecurity, it's easy just to say no. But now they're more receptive to this now because of this particular instance. And I think now it's just a matter of, what can we do to prevent these type of scenarios from happening? And that was, I think, a good wake-up call now, because I do get a lot of calls from customers now saying, remember that thing you talked about in terms of remediating my machines? I want to turn it on now. How do I do that? And now they're getting a lot of buy-in from, the various parts of the organization, because they've been affected. When they're down, they're down. They can't use their machine. Doesn't matter if you're in IT or not. But that's just one example I can think of. I know it doesn't answer the question specifically, but that's one that has, kind of opened the doors for that cross department collaboration.
All right. Well, that's actually really insightful, and I it's funny that you mentioned the great outage of the live because I think that is still a hot topic of conversation with security leaders today. That is a hot topic of conversation with investment bankers, with venture capitalists. I think that that event sent ripples that are still being felt in the industry today. Darren, what are your thoughts then on trying to achieve better cross-functional collaboration and trying to get board buy-in for investing in some of the great technologies that for example, Dell has?
So I think you just alluded to it. And if I look at Eric in the example that he said, I'd say it's awareness is first and foremost really important. So using that example of the outage, it became, top headlines. There was a lot of awareness going across. And, if I look at George and your corporation, perhaps you were being asked questions around, hey, do we have this enabled right now or not? But vPro and awareness around that, the calls that I'm in, I've pulled in Eric over the last little while to talk a little bit more, do demos around vPro. So I think awareness is probably a big thing. If I go back to collaboration at its core, communication is a really big thing. So it's understanding, what's prioritized, how to look at the overall cybersecurity goals, what they are, and what you need to do to kind of get there. From board level, different leaders across the organization, they need to be all brought to that same table and stress the importance of, cybersecurity and the current landscape that they're working in, and then just working towards those common goals. Right, whether it's, hey, line my bottom line as a profitable business, everyone has an objective around, a metric or a number to go work against. You can do that by having the communication, by having the awareness on all the things that are out there, and then go chart towards that single unified vision.
Awesome. That's exactly the kind of response I was looking for. So I appreciate that. I'm just going to do a note now for everyone in the audience that's listening. We're going to have one last fixed question for the gentleman here, and then we want to go to a Q&A. So if you guys have questions for the Q&A, please put them in the chat now, then we'll get to them afterwards. So we should have about 5-10 minutes for Q&A. Please volunteer your questions, though. These guys have been covering some great program points. I'm sure you folks might be wondering how to implement some of these technologies, how to actually get these proper conversations going to get the buy-in. Eric and Darren would be really happy to help you guys out. Let's actually see if we can get these questions in. And then for you gentlemen, we'll have one last question. Eric, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on the evolution of cybersecurity strategies as AI continues to evolve over the next 12 months? How do you see the CS landscape shifting?
I mean, obviously the tech factors. I think one thing that may be overlooked is the security companies you utilize right now, like the actual EDR, for example. I'll just use EDR example. They have a lot of things coming down the pipeline, which you may not be aware of. I think it's good to talk to them in terms of what's coming down the line. Because I know I won't name any companies here because I can't disclose things, but they do have things I know for deep fakes. One of the companies we'll work with, another one for reduction in terms of power requirements to run the EDRs, etc. So I think it'd be good to talk to your actual EDRs and your security providers in general to see what's coming down the line. And on the converse side is if they don't have anything that's kind of meet your requirements, why don't you request it? So one of the things that selfishly that we want to happen is that we want to optimize their code by using what's inherent in the silicon. So you can obviously request it from your EDR. At that point, they can rewrite their software accordingly if it meets their requirements. So that's just kind of what I think is talk to your security providers and see what's coming down the landscape, because there's a lot of good stuff coming down from an AI perspective. It's just that they can disclose it to you, I can't.
Thank you for that. And no worries, like there are enough people here with clearances who love saying that I can't talk about that. So I think everyone's on board. Darren, what's your perspective on what's coming down the landscape?
Yes, I'll probably tie it back to some of my initial opening comments, right? AI for good and AI for bad. So AI for bad, if I think about the threat landscape that we're in, it's terrifying, right? To think at how quickly this can continue to evolve. If I look at it from an AI for good perspective, think about the automation, think about the productivity enhancements that you can get at your fingertips now, thanks to AI. So you want to look to explore some of that. AI for bad, going back to the other lens, right, from an ethical and security perspective, as these tools are learning more and more and more information from me, what is it doing with that, right? And I think these are valid questions that a lot of you folks that are taking the time to dial in are constantly asking your vendors, right? The people that you're working with. A recent example, so, going back to more the technology lens that I live on a day-to-day, if you think about mixed reality, right? So I just read an article this past week about potential threat actors could record someone in a VR experience. So using eye tracking and where my eyes are moving to could actually dictate what I'm typing in on a keyboard perspective, because it's tracking where you're looking at from an eye perspective. And when I came across this article, I was just absolutely floored, because I was like, this is crazy, because there could be so much more that they can do. And it was just simply recording your eye tracking and where you're using your eyes to type in. So wearing a VR headset, you're fully immersed, can't see your surroundings, or even mixed reality, where your existing reality is kind of brought in. So as this technology continues to evolve, right, the same time, these threat actors are going to get even more creative. So wearable tech, we're all in an era where, you're wearing, smartwatch, all that data that's being collected, how is it being utilized? So a lot of things, not necessarily tied back to Dell, but these are just some of the things that, I'm personally curious about. And it's exciting, but it's also equally terrifying. And when I think about my daughter, who's 7 right now, going to be growing up in this landscape, who knows what's going to happen, when she's an adult and what she's going to be faced with. So AI for good, AI for bad, and everything that comes with it.
It's amazing that you kind of mentioned some of these. I don't even know if they just be POC threats or if they're real threats in the wild. But some of these methodologies, I mean, it's funny because I'm first of all mind blown that they're literally now using someone's eye direction to actually try to scrape keys. So that's absolutely crazy. And you'll have to send me that article, please. But I'm wondering kind of my thinking around the defense for that is like, oh, you need to have a cover for your webcam, and that's like a super cheap $1 solution. Is it maybe a case that we could be overthinking some of this stuff? And I mean, yeah, like everyone loves a new startup that's got some flashy new product, but there are plenty of videos out there on YouTube that show useless tech innovations, and I think maybe in the security space we might also see a lot of these types of things. Eric, I'm wondering if you could tell me what potential solutions really still rely on more traditional methodologies? I mean, is there still a space for some of these AI-enabled problems to still be solved with old school security, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the old school security, I mean, I think we talked about it at length, and Darren started off with it, was the user training understanding of it. And the AI can help that and complement that, but I think a lot of it comes down to the old school understanding of just basic security pieces of it, in terms of what you disclose. And a lot of companies, part of their policies, you have to go through that training first of all and sign off on it. Just things that we would think, because we're in IT, that are common sense may not be common sense to a lot of folks.
Yeah, common sense ain't too common. I always hear that all the time. So we don't really have any questions for Q&A, and that's okay. It is a Friday afternoon and all, but we do have plenty of time for closing thoughts. So let's give you both a few minutes to do so. Darren, why don't you go ahead first?
Yeah. So first and
Wait,
foremost, as we get,
hold on. Someone came in at the last second.
that's
Okay.
good.
Okay, it's good. Thank you. Who's this? Casey. Thank you very much. All right, so first question from Casey. Have you seen higher education develop policies to address AI adoption? Any examples? And number two, what kind of productivity gains have you seen in higher education due to adoption of AI from a staff or administration point of view, and also from a research point of view? I'll throw that up in the air. Which one of you two wants to take that first?
So if I read the question correctly, it may not be specific for security per se, but Dell actually, as part of an event that Dell hosted at the Sheraton Hotel in Markham, it was just for higher ed, and in terms of how they use AI correctly. I can't remember the institute that's named it, but they discuss how you can use AI, better in higher ed. So I'll just give an example. I'll give you two examples. I was just at curriculum night at my kid's school 2 days ago, and believe it or not, the English teacher has them write all their essays in class on pen and paper. And the reason for that is because the kids can use ChatGPT and write up their documents. But the example from the Dell event that I was part of a few months back is how do we use AI in higher ed in the kids' favor? So an example of that, and I don't want to go on too long on this, but the kid will write a sentence. Let's say, for example, I was scared because I was walking. So they would put that in a generative AI prompt to image. So the teacher would put that in, and it'll generate an image. Is this what you're thinking of? The kid said, no, that's not really what I'm thinking of. Okay, rewrite your sentence again. I was scared because I was walking in a dark forest because there were a lot of low-hanging trees. Put that in a prompt, and then it generates the image and say, yeah, that's more what I'm thinking of. So they can use AI to help with the actual education piece versus it being a bad thing. The other one is in terms of adoption of AI. So AI is a really big term. There are things built in natively in the operating system now, Windows 11 specifically, and what we call the Core Ultra PCs that will help your productivity. For example, the background blur, it will use less power, real live transcription, so I can speak to the device or even get a audio clip, and it'll transcribe that for me. What you'll see in the future is real-time translation, where you can speak to it. Let's say I may speak to it in Cantonese, it'll actually transcribe in English. So there are things coming to market now. Keep in mind the commercial machines from Intel just came to market in March. So it's fairly new still. So you'll see things evolve eventually.
Darren, what about your take?
Yeah, so I think Eric talked about the evolution of large language models and how that can be used to augment workloads. Eric also touched on some of the stuff that I would have brought up from a OS perspective, and what our friends at Microsoft are doing from a Copilot perspective, and some of the tools. So if I look at it back to the higher ed perspective, so I could answer Casey's kind of second question here, which is more, what kind of productivity gains have you seen in higher ed due to the adoption of AI? So I could think about, from a help desk, from an IT perspective, so creating your own chat bot that your end users can go and ask questions and extract insights, as opposed to calling your help desk. From an HR perspective, you have all these policies. If you have students that have questions, you could create your own kind of document repository. So you're seeing more AI kind of tools streamline that vast amount of information that exists, and kind of help those students as it relates to higher ed, the teachers, the admin staff, extract insights. From a policy perspective, I think, I support a lot of our higher education customers here in Eastern Canada, and a lot of them are currently working on policies and procedures around generative AI, and using Eric's example of his kid using ChatGPT or whatever large language model to optimize kind of writing. You're seeing that in practical use, even in Outlook, right? Using a large language model to make you more productive or sound a little bit more crisp in how you're writing or communicating with others. So I think there's got to be a lot of policies, whether it's from an ethics perspective, whether it's from a privacy perspective. All of that's currently being looked at, and this field is transforming at rapid paces now. And you're going to see a lot more small language models, so SLMs, come directly on the endpoints. So you won't need huge infrastructures in your backend. So as time goes on, there's going to be even more to think about. But I think we're coming up to the end, but I'll throw it back to you, George. Hopefully I did answer kind of the question. It can get very, very long-winded just because there's so much to think about.
Well, and for Casey's sake, thank you for the questions. First of all, thank you for the responses, both Darren and Eric. And Casey, you can, I'm sure, reach out to them after the chat if you want to continue more, or if anyone wants to reach our panelists afterwards, I'm sure that will be made available to them. Now we do have to hit the close, but I still want to give you guys a chance to have a closing statement. So if you guys could take 30 seconds, Eric, go ahead first, closing statement.
Yeah, I think the key thing is AI is a very big term. The big thing is to actually try it. So get a device that supports the AI features, and currently that's Intel Core Ultra based devices. Try and see what's available to you and how it can help you in your environment.
Awesome. And Darren, yourself?
Yeah, so Dell Trusted Devices, how we have security built in, built with, built on. Please reach out to your Dell account team. We love to work together. And to Intel and CIO Canada, thanks for the opportunity to do this webinar and the white paper. Back to you.
For myself, thank you for all the CIO CAN members who participated in that white paper discussion, and thank you for everyone today who sat and listened to this conversation. Like I said, it will be put out across CIO CAN channels. Lorraine, I think you're going to cover that piece, and then the white paper is going to be released after this as well. So Lorraine, with that, I will hand the mic off to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, gentlemen. What a great discussion. I think we could have gone on for so much longer, but Friday afternoon, 3:30, here we are. Appreciate your support and all of the insights that you've provided. I did want to just remind everyone that we are going to be sending out an email that does have the link to the white paper so that you can download that and share it wherever you can, as well as this broadcast will be posted. And share your feedback with us. There's a quick survey in there, 8 questions. Tell us what you're thinking. Tell us what you're interested in. We want to know what your experience has been and what you're looking forward to hearing about next. And just a reminder that registration has just opened up now for our next white paper and fireside chat with these gentlemen here today. It's going to launch on October the 31st, and the topic is Advancing Endpoint Security in a Hybrid AI-Powered Era. So that being said, again, thank you so much to Dell and to Intel for your support. And George, as always, fabulous. Thank you. COCAN members, appreciate you being part of this community. Look forward to seeing you and talking to you all soon. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.